Step back in time with me to an era when medicine was anything but ordinary, and healing meant experimenting with some of the weirdest, most bizarre techniques imaginable. From skull surgeries to magic potions, ancient doctors weren't afraid to push the boundaries of what we now call healthcare. I'm excited to dive into some of the strangest medical practices from the past that'll leave you both amazed and, honestly, a little thankful for the modern medicine we have today. Trepanation. Trepanation sounds bizarre, right? Drilling a hole into someone's skull might seem like something straight out of a horror movie, but it's actually one of the oldest medical practices in human history. The name comes from the Greek word trypanon, meaning to bore or to drill. Surprisingly, this practice dates back to the Mesolithic era, long before the rise of civilization. Believe it or not, it's even mentioned in Greek mythology in the dramatic birth of Athena. According to Hesiod's Theogony, Zeus, the king of the gods, swallowed his first wife, Metis, after hearing a prophecy that her child would challenge his rule. Unknown to Zeus, Metis was already pregnant with Athena, a goddess destined to rival him in power and wisdom. Soon after, Zeus was struck by a terrible headache. None of the gods could help him, so Hephaestus, the blacksmith god, stepped in with his double-headed axe, the labrys. With one mighty swing, he split Zeus's skull open, and out sprang Athena, fully armed and ready for battle. If that's not the most dramatic trepanation in history, what is? But trepanation isn't just a myth. Archaeological discoveries have revealed skulls from ancient Peru and Europe with precise holes cut into them, proving early humans performed this procedure. In 1865, American explorer Ephraim George Squire received an Incan skull with a trepanned hole as a gift. The hole's edges showed signs of healing, meaning the person survived. More skulls were later found in France, where Neolithic communities had also mastered this risky surgery using sharpened stones. Some even turned the removed bone discs into amulets, blending medical and spiritual purposes. What's incredible to me is how these ancient civilizations succeeded, while modern hospitals in the 1800s often failed. Infection rates were so high that survival from trepanation rarely exceeded 10%. Yet somehow, ancient surgeons pulled it off without modern tools or sterile techniques. As strange as it sounds, trepanation wasn't creepy. It was groundbreaking. The next medical practice is even more surprising. But before we disclose the next one, like and subscribe to the channel. Bloodletting. Bloodletting, the ancient practice of draining blood to cure illnesses, once stood at the heart of medicine, surrounded by mystery and tradition. Let me take you back to a time when people believed our bodies were governed by 4 magical fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If any of these humors went out of balance, it was believed that chaos would follow. You'd become sick, angry, or worse. To restore harmony, they turned to bloodletting. This ritual started in ancient Egypt, passed through Greece, and was embraced by Hippocrates, the father of medicine. He believed in the theory of humors, and his Roman successor, Galen, took it a step further, calling blood the king of humor. By the Middle Ages, everyone, priests, barbers, you name it, was performing bloodletting to cure all sorts of ailments. Even the barber poles with their red and white stripes, they're a reminder of this bloody history. They didn't stop there. Cupping and leech therapy were also common practices. Royalty wasn't immune either. Queen Marie Antoinette was bled when she fainted, and President George Washington tragically succumbed to bloodletting during an infection. It wasn't all without controversy, though. By the 18th century, some doctors began questioning its benefits, with Pierre-Charles Alexandre Louis leading the charge. Still, it lingered into the 19th century, with some believing in its healing powers until as late as 1942. This wasn't just a European tradition. In the Americas, Mayan priests offered their own blood to the gods, believing it would bring them divine visions. Whether for spiritual or medicinal purposes, bloodletting spanned across cultures and centuries. It may sound strange now, but for them, it was their best shot at healing. And considering some of the practices that followed, it doesn't seem so wild. It may seem bizarre today, but bloodletting was their best shot at healing. Compared to what comes next, though, this is tame. Cannibal medicine. In the 17th century, a strange line from a John Donne poem sparked an unexpected journey of discovery for Louise Noble, an Australian scholar, The line described women as sweetness and wit, but also as mummy-possessed. That odd word, mummy, led Noble down a rabbit hole, and what she uncovered was both bizarre and fascinating. In early modern Europe, human remains weren't just buried or preserved, they were eaten. That's right, Europeans were cannibals, but not in the way you might imagine. For hundreds of years, from the Renaissance to the 17th century, medicines made from human bones, blood, and fat were used to treat all kinds of ailments, from headaches to epilepsy. And this wasn't some underground practice, it was mainstream. Royalty, scientists, and even priests took part. Egyptian mummies were looted from tombs and ground into powders to stop internal bleeding. Skulls, often stolen from graves, were crushed to cure head pains. Even the moss growing on buried skulls became a prized remedy, believed to stop nosebleeds. Fat was used to soothe wounds and rubbed into the skin for gout. Blood, thought to carry the soul's vitality, was especially prized. Freshness was key. Some people even paid executioners for warm blood straight from the condemned. This wasn't seen as gruesome at the time. It was based on the idea that like cures like. Powdered skull for head problems, blood for blood diseases. The belief also tied into the idea that consuming part of a person gave you their strength. Blood was considered especially powerful, with its spirit thought to connect the body and soul. Leonardo da Vinci once wrote about how life in a dead body could be revived within a living one. But while Europeans consumed human remains, they criticized others, like Native Americans, for practicing cannibalism. The hypocrisy was apparent. These strange remedies persisted until medical science advanced, leaving these practices behind. This isn't creepy, it's just another chapter in medicine's long, strange history. Eye surgery with spiked tools. Next up, I'm going to discuss a fascinating and strange topic today, cataract surgery, which has an ancient past stretching back thousands of years. It's actually one of the oldest surgical procedures still performed today, and its history is full of surprising twists. The ancient Egyptians were among the first to try cataract surgery. They used a method called couching, where a sharp needle was used to push the cloudy lens out of the line of sight and into the back of the eye. This did help some patients regain a little vision, but it was far from perfect. The Romans, always looking to refine techniques, developed a method called needling, where they broke the cataract into tiny pieces, hoping the body would absorb them. But, like the Egyptians, they didn't replace the damaged lens, which meant blurry vision at best. It wasn't until the 20th century that things really took a turn for the better. In the 1940s, an English ophthalmologist named Harold Ridley invented the intraocular lens, a tiny artificial lens that completely changed cataract surgery. With this, doctors could remove the cloudy lens and replace it with a clear one, giving patients clear sight for the first time. Back in Roman times, though, the surgical tools and techniques were much more primitive. Needles had to be carefully crafted, sharp enough to pierce the eye, but blunt enough to avoid serious damage. Surgeons would insert these needles into the eye and gently rotate them to break up the cataract, a process detailed by the Roman author Celsus. They'd use the blunt end of the needle to seal the wound and heat to cauterize the area. Believe it or not, they even thought that a blow to the head could dislodge a cataract, which sounds incredibly risky. But the Romans didn't just rely on surgery. They had oculists who made ointments for eye diseases, often using stamped sticks of medicine called collyria. These remedies contain natural antiseptics like vinegar or copper oxide, which surprisingly worked pretty well for treating infections and preventing scars. The Romans, with their basic tools and limited knowledge, showed some impressive ingenuity. Their medical practices laid the foundation for the advanced cataract surgeries we have today. Radium. Let me tell you an amazing yet strange story. In the final years of the 1800s, two groundbreaking discoveries forever changed medicine. The first was Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen's discovery of X-rays, a mysterious and invisible force that could see right through the human body. The second was Marie and Pierre Curie's discovery of radium, a glowing radioactive element that seemed to hold almost magical properties. Together, these two discoveries opened the door to some of the strangest medical practices of the 20th century. Marie Curie, a Polish-born scientist, and her husband Pierre found radium hidden in a uraninite mineral in 1898. The Curies believed radium had extraordinary potential to improve human health. Refusing to patent their method of isolating it, They made it available for the world to use freely. They used it, and they did. Radium became the medical miracle everyone wanted a piece of. Moreover, doctors and even salespeople started creating bizarre radium products, claiming they could cure anything. There was radium-infused water, toothpaste, and even the Revigator, a jug that dissolved radium into drinking water. People believed these glowing substances could treat everything from arthritis and gout to high blood pressure and skin diseases. In hospitals, radium needles were implanted into tumors to stop their growth, an early and surprisingly effective cancer treatment. During World War I, X-rays and radium treatments became essential on the battlefield. Marie Curie worked tirelessly, designing mobile X-ray units, dubbed petites curies, to diagnose wounded soldiers. She even brought her teenage daughter to the front lines to help operate these machines. However, while radium and X-rays revolutionized medicine, the risks of handling radioactive materials were not yet understood. By the mid-20th century, the golden age of radium was fading. Its high cost, scarcity, and dangerous health effects became impossible to ignore. Many earlier uses, like radium water and ointments, were abandoned. However, its role in cancer treatments remained, paving the way for modern radiotherapy. Though the fascination with radium has dimmed, its legacy still glows, proof of how science can be both wondrous and strange. Mercury cures. For over 3,000 years, one element has lingered in the shadows of medicine: mercury. Gleaming, liquid, mysterious mercury has been a cure-all for centuries. Mercury and its compounds were once trusted to treat almost everything: parasites, syphilis, inflammation, constipation, and teething pain in babies. It didn't matter if the illness was deadly or mundane, someone swore mercury could fix it. By the early 1900s, mercury had wormed its way into countless industries. From glass thermometers to neon lights, from pesticides to jewelry making, mercury was everywhere. But its most notorious role remained in medicine. Doctors prescribed calomel, mercurous chloride, like it was a miracle powder. For babies struggling with teething pain, parents eagerly rubbed calomel-laced powders like Dr. Moffat's Teethina into their gums, trusting the promises on the label. Make baby fat as a pig. But the side effects? Oh, they were sinister. In 1921, an alarming new illness emerged: Pink's disease. Babies developed swollen, icy hands and feet that turned red and peeled like tomatoes. Fever soared, weight plummeted, and the itching drove them into madness. They scratched themselves raw, banged their heads, and wailed endlessly. Doctors were baffled, blaming everything from arsenic to allergies. But by the 1950s, the truth came out. Mercury was the culprit. And it wasn't just babies. Even the most prominent figures in history fell under mercury's spell for centuries. Napoleon Bonaparte, Edgar Allan Poe, and Andrew Jackson turned to mercury as a cure. They swallowed it, rubbed it on their skin, and trusted it to banish everything from melancholy to parasites. But mercury's dark side could not stay hidden forever. While some argue its safety if properly purified, the dangers it posed eventually overshadowed its benefits. Today, mercury is remembered as a double-edged sword in medicine, a shimmering substance that promised healing but delivered harm. And as strange as this may sound, the next medical practice I'll reveal is even weirder: snake oils and venom treatments. Let me take you into the strange and fascinating world where venom meets cancer research and where ancient remedies take on a deadly modern twist. Hematological malignancies, cancers of the blood, are a silent yet widespread killer. They start in bone marrow, the very factory of our blood, and account for thousands of deaths every year. What are the most well-known types? Acute myeloid leukemia, AML, and acute lymphoblastic leukemia, ALL. These cancers are relentless, especially in older patients. Chemotherapy only works for about 10% of people over 80, leaving many without effective options. Researchers have searched for better treatments for decades, and now they're turning to something unexpected: snake venom. Yes, venom, the stuff that makes snakes so feared. There are around 3,600 species of snakes worldwide, but only 600 are venomous. Even fewer, about 200, pose a real danger to humans. Venom is their secret weapon, stored in glands near the head, ready to immobilize prey. Once injected into the bloodstream, its toxic effects can be devastating. But here's where it gets interesting. This deadly venom might hold the key to saving lives. Snake venom has been used in medicine for centuries. Ancient Greeks dabbled with it as early as 380 before Christ. By the 18th and 19th centuries, remedies made from rattlesnake and viper venom, dubbed snake oil, claimed to cure everything from rheumatism to skin diseases. Though most of these miracle cures were baseless, modern science took a closer look. Today, venom-derived drugs like captopril, made from pit viper venom, help treat high blood pressure and heart failure. But venom's potential doesn't stop there. Scientists are now exploring its anti-cancer abilities. Snake venom is a cocktail of powerful proteins, enzymes, and compounds. Some disintegrins and L-amino acid oxidases can target cancer cells, stopping their invasion and spread. Others may block tumor growth entirely. It's a strange irony that something so lethal could become a lifesaver. Dead mice for toothache. Let's get back to ancient Egypt, a land of towering pyramids, golden treasures, and, believe it or not, dead mice used as medicine. Yes, you heard that right. Among their many fascinating traditions, the Egyptians had a remedy for toothaches that would leave you laughing or cringing. Picture this. You're lounging by the Nile, enjoying the warm sun, when suddenly your tooth starts to throb. What do? Today you'd pop a painkiller or rush to the dentist. But in ancient Egypt, oh no, their cure involved grabbing a mouse, mashing it into a paste, and smearing it on your aching tooth. And they didn't stop there. Sometimes they'd mix in herbs, thinking it would help. The result? A concoction that was more nightmare fuel than medical breakthrough. This wasn't some random whim, though. The Egyptians, living without modern dental hygiene, believed mice, familiar creatures in their environment, held some healing power. It's hard to say precisely why they chose mice for this role, but their faith in these tiny rodents was strong enough to turn them into medicine. Now, before you gag, let's put this into perspective. The Egyptians were brilliant in many ways. They built wonders of the world and revolutionized art, science, and engineering. But medicine? Let's just say they had some interesting ideas. The mouse cure was, of course, completely ineffective and unhygienic. Imagine the infections this could have caused. Fast forward to today, and this bizarre treatment serves as a reminder of how far medicine has come. While we now know that proper dental care is the answer to toothaches, desperation led to some truly wild experiments back then. And as strange as it sounds, this mouse-based remedy isn't the only eyebrow-raising practice from history. What I'm about to share will definitely make you question everything you thought you knew about medical treatments. Stick around, because things are about to get even creepier. Lobotomy. In a time when doctors believed that cutting into someone's brain was the solution to mental health issues, lobotomies were born. Picture this. It's the 1930s, and the medical world had no clue how to handle mental health disorders like schizophrenia and severe depression. Desperate for answers, doctors decided that brain surgery might just be the key. This is where lobotomies came in, one of the most bizarre treatments ever dreamed up. Surgeons would sever the connections between the frontal lobe and the rest of the brain, believing it would calm patients and reduce troubling symptoms. Sounds insane, right? But back then, it was cutting-edge medicine. The methods they used were wild. It wasn't just one procedure, there were different ways to perform it. One involved cutting parts of the brain out, while another severed nerve connections. The goal? To make patients more manageable by altering their behavior. Usually, this meant making people less agitated, less aware, and less emotional. By the 1950s, people began to realize that lobotomies weren't all they were cracked up to be. Side effects like seizures, personality changes, and even death made people rethink the procedure. With the introduction of safer medications like Thorazine, lobotomies began to fade out. It was a sad chapter in medical history, but it led to better treatments for mental illness. This outdated method of treating mental illness shows just how far we've come in medicine. Thankfully, we now have better, safer ways to help those in need. And remember, some of these old practices, as bizarre as they seem, are nothing compared to the advanced treatments we have today. Rhinoplasty. The idea of altering the shape of the nose goes back much further than many realize, with a fascinating history that spans centuries. One moment that really caught my attention was in Piero della Francesca's famous portraits of the Duke and Duchess of Urbino. In these paintings, the Duke's nose stands out, not just because of an injury, but because it was believed to have been deliberately reduced to improve his vision. The theory is that by altering the nose, he could see better over his high nasal bridge. Though this idea remains unverified, it sparked some interesting medical discussions. The real turning point for rhinoplasty, though, came in 1887. John Orlando Rowe, an otolaryngologist from Michigan, completely revolutionized the field with his paper Correction of the Pug Deformity, which described the first formal rhinoplasty procedure. This paper essentially laid the foundation for what would become an advanced field of surgery. Dr. Jacques Joseph then took it even further, establishing the first hospital dedicated to facial surgery. His work with soldiers during World War I played a huge role in advancing surgical techniques that are still used today. Over the years, doctors like Dr. Morris Cottle, Dr. Irving Goldman, and Dr. Jack Anderson each contributed new insights, pushing the boundaries of what's possible in reshaping the nose. Lithotomy for kidney stones. The history of treating kidney stones is pretty wild, and I can't wait to walk you through how medical techniques evolved in ways that might surprise you. It all began in ancient Greece, where a physician named Cornelius Celsus first recorded a method for removing bladder stones, lithotomy, back in the 1st century AD. His technique involved making a small cut near the perineum to remove the stones, and it lasted for hundreds of years. But as science and surgery progressed, so did the methods for treating these painful stones. Fast forward to the 16th century, and things took a big turn when Pierre Franco introduced a new approach. Instead of cutting from the bottom, he performed the first suprapubic lithotomy, making an incision above the pubic bone. This was a game changer, giving patients a different option for removing those pesky stones. Then, in the 19th century, things really started getting interesting. In 1874, American surgeon James Bigelow invented the lithotrite, a tool that could crush the stones inside the bladder, saving patients from having major surgery. This was a huge step forward toward less invasive treatments. But the real breakthrough came in the 20th century. Surgeons began using even more advanced techniques like ureteroscopy, which allowed them to remove stones from the ureter without needing significant cuts. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get any better, in 1980, the extracorporeal shockwave machine was introduced, making kidney stone removal even more straightforward and less painful. Now, thanks to minimally invasive methods like percutaneous nephrolithotomy and shockwave lithotripsy, kidney stones aren't the huge problem they once were. It's amazing to see how far we've come, and how much easier and safer this medical practice has become over the years. Cauterization. Cauterization, using heat to stop bleeding and treat injuries, has a history as ancient and mysterious as the tools once used to carry it out. Honestly, I couldn't believe how long this strange technique has been around. It goes all the way back to ancient Egypt. The earliest reference to cauterization was found in the Egyptian surgical papyrus, dating from around 1550 BC. I mean, how wild is that? But the Egyptians weren't the only ones using this fiery method. The ancient Greeks also knew about it, and even Hippocrates, the father of medicine, wrote about it around 400 BC. He saw it as a way to treat bleeding, joint problems, and even hemorrhoids. And it didn't stop there. The ancient Arabs, Persians, and indigenous peoples across the Americas used cauterization too. They had heated tools like lances and knives to apply this treatment. As time went on, cauterization became more common. By the medieval era, it was a key part of surgery. In fact, the Babylonian Talmud, written in 500 AD, even mentions using hot iron to treat strokes. Fast forward to the 19th century, and we enter a whole new era of medical discovery. In 1900, Dr. Joseph Riviere, a French doctor, had an idea while treating a patient with insomnia. He noticed that an electrical current caused the patient's skin to coagulate, and that spark led him to use electrical cauterization to remove a cancerous ulcer from his patient's hand. Pretty crazy, right? Cauterization has definitely come a long way since its humble beginnings. Today's versions of this technique are much more advanced and controlled, but the story of traditional cautery is fascinating. It's filled with strange tools, heated debates, and evolving practices. And there you have it, some of the wildest, most bizarre medical practices from ancient times. I find it fascinating how these methods, while shocking or strange to us now, were once the best options available to healers. They really show how far we've come in understanding medicine and the human body. But when you look back, every strange practice had its own logic and reasoning at the time, and they paved the way for the medical advancements we rely on today. It's honestly a crazy journey through history that reminds me of just how much progress we've made.